All right, so today we're gonna take a deep dive into something pretty heavy.
Yeah.
This whole relationship between former President Trump, he's back for round two,
Round two, exactly.
and Ukrainian President Zelensky.
Right.
You sent over this recent article about Trump's stance on Ukraine.
Yeah.
And
Lot to unpack there.
I was reading it and I was just like, oh boy,
Yeah.
we are in for it.
Buckle up.
Yeah, buckle up.
It's a wild ride.
This is high-stakes international politics.
Yeah.
With
Really.
a little bit of personal drama mixed in there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating how much history is packed into this relationship.
Yeah.
And how these events from the past might be influencing the decisions that are being made right now.
Exactly. It's all playing out.
On a global stage.
On this huge global stage.
With a war raging.
With a war raging.
Yeah.
So to kind of set the scene for people,
Yeah.
Trump's recent actions regarding Ukraine
Yeah.
have raised a lot of eyebrows.
Definitely.
He sent Secretary of State Marco Rubio
Right.
to try to broker a ceasefire
Yeah.
with Russia.
Mm-hmm. But
But
he
I've
did
done
it
it
with
without-
involving Ukraine.
At all.
At all.
Which is kind of
That's-
unprecedented.
Yeah, and on top of that,
Right.
he's pushing this resources for security deal,
Yeah.
which some analysts are comparing to
Too.
the Treaty of Versailles
Oh, wow.
in terms of how it might impact Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then to add another layer,
Right.
Washington is refusing to back this UN resolution
Yeah.
that's condemning Russia's invasion.
Condemning the invasion.
So what's your take on it of this? Well, I think it's clear that,
Uh,
Trump's approach to Ukraine
Yeah.
in this second term
yeah.
is raising some questions about his motivation.
Yeah.
Some analysts are suggesting
Yeah.
that this might be part of a larger strategy,
Okay.
one that prioritizes immediate economic benefits
Okay.
and potential deals with Russia
Okay.
over these long-term alliances.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So he's playing the long game.
Playing the long game?
But maybe not
Right.
in the way people are expecting.
Right.
Yeah. And there's also this theory that
Right.
Trump sees this whole conflict in Ukraine
As a distraction.
as a distraction from his main focus.
Which is China.
China.
Yeah, he's been pretty vocal about that.
Yeah, he has been vocal about that. But some are saying it goes beyond,
Beyond the strategic calculation.
just strategic calculations, that there's a genuine
Dislike.
not just for Ukraine's government,
Right.
but for Zelensky personally.
Personally.
What do you think about that?
I mean, there's definitely evidence that points in that direction.
Yeah.
We have reports
Right.
from Trump's former envoy to Kyiv
Yeah.
that indicate that Trump held a very negative view of Ukraine, calling it a corrupt country full of terrible people.
Oh, wow.
And his recent public statements where he's labeled Zelensky a dictator without elections
Wow.
and blamed him for the war.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't exactly suggest warm feelings.
No, it doesn't. I remember reading about that American diplomat
Yeah.
who believes that Trump wants to see Zelensky ousted.
Ousted completely.
Completely.
Yeah.
It all just feels very reminiscent
Of certain events.
certain events from his first term.
Exactly.
Right. And to really understand this,
His animosity.
this apparent animosity, we have to go back a bit
Yeah.
to the roots of Trump's relationship with Ukraine.
Yes.
And it involves one of the biggest scandals
Oh, yeah.
of his first presidency.
Absolutely.
Paul Manafort.
Paul Manafort.
And the infamous Black Ledger.
The Black Ledger, yeah.
That's a name that sends shivers down the spines of political analysts everywhere.
For sure.
For those who might need a refresher.
Yeah.
Manafort was Trump's campaign chairman
Right.
back in 2016.
2016.
But before that,
Way before that.
he was deeply involved
Deeply involved.
in Ukrainian politics.
Exactly. He worked with former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych,
Yeah.
a pro-Russian leader.
Yeah.
And this was during
Yeah.
a really volatile time in Ukraine. This was the time leading up to the Euromaidan protests,
Right.
which were mass demonstrations
Yeah.
against Yanukovych's government.
Yeah.
And their decision to abandon closer ties with the European Union in favor of Russia.
Right.
Ultimately, these protests led to Yanukovych being removed from office,
Yeah.
and he fled to Russia.
And that's when things got even more complicated.
Right.
Shortly after Yanukovych fled to Moscow,
Yeah.
these documents emerged
Yeah.
that allegedly showed millions of dollars in undisclosed payments
Right.
from Yanukovych's government to Manafort.
To Manafort,
This became known as
the Black Ledger scandal.
the Black Ledger scandal.
Yeah.
So the Black Ledger contained detailed financial records.
Yeah.
Allegedly, these handwritten ledgers
Right.
that were kept by this pro-Russian Party of Regions.
The Party of Regions.
And it indicated these large sums of money
Yeah.
that were funneled to various individuals,
Yeah.
including Paul Manafort.
Including Manafort.
The implications were huge.
Huge, yeah.
It suggested potential corruption
Corruption.
and illicit financial dealings
At the highest level.
at the highest levels of the Ukrainian government.
Wow.
And this was all happening while Manafort was managing Trump's presidential campaign.
Right in the middle of it all.
The timing
Could not have been worse.
could not have been
It was
worse.
a bombshell.
Yeah.
And while the Black Ledger itself was never actually used as evidence in court,
Right.
the scandal
Yeah.
led to Manafort resigning from the campaign.
Resigning, yeah.
And although it was never proven that these payments were directly related to Trump,
Right.
it cast this huge shadow over
Yeah.
the campaign. And it really fueled suspicions
Yeah.
about Trump's ties to Russia.
Right. And it's important to note that Trump and his allies
Yeah.
have consistently denied the legitimacy of the Black Ledger,
Right.
calling it a fabrication.
Fabrication.
And a ploy by the Democrats to undermine his presidency.
You have to undermine him.
So this belief likely played a significant role
Absolutely.
in shaping his view of Ukraine.
Yeah.
It kind of painted them as adversaries.
White as adversaries.
Involved in a conspiracy against him.
Right.
So we've got this backdrop of a suspicion and intrigue.
Yeah.
And then
Enter Volodymyr Zelensky.
enter Volodymyr Zelensky.
Winning the 2019
Yeah.
Ukrainian presidential election.
In a landslide.
In a landslide.
And what happens almost immediately,
That infamous phone call.
that infamous phone call, which
The one that led to
the one that led to
Trump's first impeachment.
Trump's first impeachment.
That phone call is a crucial turning point in this whole saga.
It is.
It's where the personal and the political collide in a spectacular fashion.
Yeah.
During that call,
Yeah.
Trump pressured Zelensky
Yeah.
to investigate Joe Biden
Right.
and his son Hunter,
Right.
who was involved with a Ukrainian gas company called Burisma.
Burisma.
Yeah.
At the same time,
Yeah.
the Trump administration was withholding nearly $400 million
$1 million.
in military aid to Ukraine.
The Ukraine.
The timing of these events
Yeah.
raised serious concern
Serious concerns.
about a potential quid pro quo
Quid pro quo.
military aid
In exchange for
in exchange for digging up dirt
on a political rival.
on a political rival.
Yeah.
And so then we had the impeachment inquiry,
Right.
which, although it didn't lead to Trump's removal from office,
Right.
it further solidified the negative perception of Zelensky in Ukraine.
Of Ukraine, yeah.
He saw them as disloyal, like participants in a scheme to sabotage his presidency.
Sabotage him.
And this all happened while Trump was also holding on to this belief that Ukraine,
Not Russia,
was behind the hacking of the DNC servers in 2016.
Wow.
Which
that aligns
perfectly with Russian disinformation efforts.
Right.
So
that's a key point.
Yeah.
The potential and influence of Russian disinformation.
Right.
On Trump's views on Ukraine.
Yeah.
I mean, it can't be ignored.
Can't be ignored.
It's a classic example of how disinformation can poison international relations.
Right.
Creating this fog of mistrust that makes cooperation incredibly difficult.
It's like a hall of mirrors.
It is.
You can't tell what's real. And what's manipulation. And in that kind of environment, even the smallest misunderstanding can blow up into a major crisis.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the current situation.
Right.
Where we see Zelensky pushing back against Trump's narrative.
Right.
Even suggesting that Trump has been influenced by Russian disinformation. And, you know, how did the Trump administration respond to that?
Yeah.
To Zelensky pushing back against their narrative.
Right.
Vice President J.D. Vance essentially told Zelensky to keep quiet.
Yeah.
Warning that publicly criticizing Trump would backfire. It's a sign that, you know, they see any criticism of Trump's stance on Ukraine as a threat.
So basically, Zelensky's stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Between a rock and a hard place.
Right. He needs the U.S. on his side.
He does.
To counter Russian aggression. But he also can't alienate Trump completely.
Right.
It's a diplomatic
tightrope walk
with incredibly high stakes.
Incredibly high stakes, yeah. He's in a very difficult position.
Okay.
Can't appear weak.
Right.
But he also can't risk provoking the U.S.
Right.
His recent comments about Trump and Russian disinformation show that he's willing to push back.
Right.
To challenge that narrative coming from the White House.
Yeah.
But, as we saw with Vance's warning, there are risks to that approach.
There are risks. Yeah. You mentioned the high stakes.
Yeah.
What exactly are the potential consequences of this strained relationship?
The implications are pretty serious.
Yeah.
Both for Ukraine and for the international community.
Right.
For Ukraine, this apparent animosity from Trump could mean less support.
Right.
Both in terms of military aid and diplomatic pressure on Russia.
Right.
It leaves Ukraine incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
Facing a powerful adversary with limited backing from its most powerful ally.
And what about the impact on the U.S.? I mean, does this damage our credibility on the world stage?
When the U.S., a country that prides itself on supporting democracy and self-determination, appears to be turning its back on a nation fighting for its survival against an authoritarian aggressor.
Yeah.
It sends a chilling message.
It does.
To other countries.
Right.
It emboldens aggressors.
Right.
And it weakens faith in the U.S. as a reliable partner.
Yeah, it seems like this situation could also have a significant impact.
Definitely.
On the global balance of power.
Yeah.
Trump's actions.
Or inactions.
Or inactions, as some might say.
Right.
Could be seen as a green light for Russia.
Right, a green light.
To be even more aggressive in the region.
Exactly. It creates a vacuum that Russia is more than happy to fill.
Yeah.
It weakens NATO.
Right.
It divides the West.
Yeah.
And it strengthens the idea that might makes right in the world.
So we've talked about domestic politics, personal dislike, and the influence of Russian disinformation as potential factors behind Trump's stance on Ukraine.
Right.
Is there anything else we're missing here?
I mean,
could this be part of a bigger strategy?
It could be.
Like trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China?
That's a theory that some have put forward.
Yeah.
And it's not entirely implausible.
Right.
Trump has repeatedly expressed a desire to disrupt that growing partnership between Russia and China, seeing it as a threat to U.S. dominance.
So maybe all of this seemingly negative action towards Ukraine
is a calculated maneuver?
It's a calculated maneuver, like a high-stake gamble.
A high-stakes gamble.
To reshape the global power dynamics.
It's difficult to say for sure.
Yeah.
Trump's foreign policy has always been unpredictable.
It has been.
And often disregards conventional diplomatic norms.
Right.
Whether this is a deliberate strategy or simply a consequence of his personal beliefs and impulses is something that analysts will continue to debate.
It seems like we're dealing with a lot of unknowns here.
A lot of unknowns.
But one thing that is clear is that the human cost of this conflict is immense. While we're analyzing the political maneuvering and the geopolitical implications, it's crucial to remember that real people are suffering.
Absolutely.
Lives are being lost, and a nation is fighting for its survival.
You're absolutely right. The human dimension of this story can't be overlooked.
Can't be overlooked.
Behind the headlines and the political calculations are millions of Ukrainians whose lives have been upended by this war.
It's a stark reminder that foreign policy decisions have real-world consequences.
Real-world consequences.
And those consequences are often borne by ordinary people who have no say in the matter.
And it's fascinating how this situation also highlights the growing influence of disinformation in shaping international relations in today's hyper-connected world, where information spreads so rapidly and often without verification, it's becoming increasingly difficult to discern truth from falsehood.
And that makes diplomacy and international cooperation
a bit harder.
So much harder. Because how can you negotiate or build trust when you can't even agree on a shared reality?
Exactly. It creates a climate of suspicion and undermines the foundation of international relations. And it's not just governments that are affected. Citizens are also bombarded with disinformation, which can lead to polarization, political instability, and even violence.
So with all this baggage, all this tension and distrust, can the U.S. and Ukraine actually repair this fractured relationship?
That's the big question under Trump's second term. And honestly, the answer isn't clear-cut. On the one hand, there's a clear need for cooperation. The U.S. needs Ukraine as an ally to contain Russian influence. And Ukraine desperately needs U.S. support to survive this war.
But on the other hand, the level of animosity and distrust is substantial.
It is.
Trump's personal feelings towards Zelensky, his potential susceptibility to Russian disinformation, and his focus on domestic political considerations all create massive obstacles.
Huge obstacles.
To any meaningful reconciliation.
It's a situation where both sides need each other. But don't particularly like each other. And that's a recipe for a very unstable and unpredictable relationship. The coming months will be crucial in determining the trajectory of this relationship.
So what do you think we should be watching for?
I think
to understand how this situation might unfold.
Keep an eye on the actions, not just the words of both the U.S. and Ukrainian governments. Look for signs of cooperation or further escalation. Pay attention to the types of aid that the U.S. is providing, the diplomatic efforts being made, and the rhetoric being used by both sides.
So we're looking for concrete actions.
Concrete actions.
Not just talk.
Not just talk.
What else should we be paying attention to as this story develops? And it seems like the spread of disinformation is something
Oh, yeah.
We need to be really aware of. It's everywhere these days.
It is.
It's hard to know what to believe.
Disinformation is rampant.
Yeah.
And it's often very difficult to separate fact from fiction.
Right.
That's why it's so important to be critical of the information you're consuming.
Right.
Don't just accept things at face value.
Yeah.
Check your sources.
Right.
Look for evidence and consider different perspectives.
So much easier said than done, though, right?
It is definitely a challenge.
Yeah. I feel like we're constantly bombarded with information.
From all sides.
From all sides.
But it's more important than ever to develop those critical thinking skills.
Right.
The fate of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And really the stability of the global order.
Right.
Depends on informed citizens who are willing to engage in these complex and challenging conversations.
He's given us a lot to think about.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm wondering, what are the potential long-term consequences if the U.S. and Ukraine can't find a way to mend this relationship?
If this rift continues.
It could have dire consequences.
Yeah.
It would likely embolden Russia, weaken NATO, and further destabilize the region.
Right.
And it would also send a dangerous message to other countries who are facing threats from authoritarian regimes that they can't rely on the U.S. for support.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
This isn't just about two leaders who don't get along.
Right.
This is about the future of democracy.
Yeah.
The balance of power in Europe.
Yep, absolutely.
And the lives of millions of people.
Millions of people.
Caught in the middle of this conflict.
Yeah, this situation really underscores the fact that personal relationships and political dynamics can have a profound impact on the world stage.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that history matters, that disinformation is a powerful weapon, and that the choices made by leaders have real-world consequences.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful.
It has been.
We've covered a lot of ground.
A lot of ground.
From the streets of Kyiv to the halls of power in Washington, uncovering this complex web of history, politics, personal animosity. And it's clear this story is far from over.
It's a story that deserves our continued attention.
It does.
Keep asking those tough questions.
Right.
Stay informed and be wary of the influence of disinformation.
Yeah.
The world needs engaged citizens who are willing to grapple with these complex issues.
Well said.
Yeah.
This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive.
It has been.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It was my pleasure.
And to you listening, thank you for joining us on this journey.
Absolutely.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay informed.
Stay informed.
And as always, thanks for taking this deep dive with us.